Hi everybody, welcome back. In this tutorial, I'm going to teach you all about the basics of the callback. I created a similar video several months ago, but I want to give an even better explanation because if you know the dash callback, then you have the power in your hands to build any type of dash app that you would like to build. The callback is the heart of working with dash. So I really want to make sure that you understand this well and you know where to look for information to learn more about the callback. And if you have any questions, as always, write me under the YouTube comments so I can help you better understand callbacks and build better apps. So I created these 5 files in my GitHub. This is my GitHub with all the videos and all the files that I've created over time. I will put the link under the video, so you go to this section of the repo. I would recommend downloading each file, going here, clicking on raw, selecting everything, and copying it into your Python IDE, PyCharm, Atom, Visual Studios, and it will be easier for you to follow along. Now, we're going to use the dash documentation, and we are going to use these files. The drop down, the radio button, everything inside GitHub. So let's open the first file. Radio.py is the first file we're going to go over. This file right here. Let me make it bigger for you so you can see. There you go. So in this app, like in all dash apps, almost all dash apps, we have a layout where we have a radio item and a markdown. And then we have the callback. And the callback is what Dash uses to connect between the components that exist inside your layout. So in this case, we have 2 components, the radio item and the markdown, and the callback is there to connect between the markdown and the radio item. You might have an app that has a drop-down and a graph. So you'll need the callback to connect between the drop-down and the graph. Or maybe you'll have a checklist or a slider or a date picker with another data or another graph or another title. Everything that you want to connect inside your Dash app has to be connected using the callback. This is what makes your Dash apps come alive. It's what makes them interactive. So in this file, we're connecting the radio item and the children of the markdown. So let's see how we do this inside the callback. First, it's important for you to know that the callback is divided into 2 sections, the callback decorator and the callback function. The callback decorator will have an output, at least one output, and at least one input. Every output and input will have a component ID and a component property. So for example, in this callback decorator, the input has a component property called value that belongs to the component ID myRadioButton. Now this component ID, remember, this is all inside the layout. So let's go into the layout to find it. This component ID is here. It's actually the DCC radio items. So it's the radio item component. And we are going to refer to the value property of that radio item. So ship. This refers to ship. And the children here is the component property of text displayed, which is the markdown. So the children is an empty string. For now, it's an empty string, because this is another component property of a dash core component. Now we're dealing with children and value, but the markdown has many different properties and the radio item has many different properties. If you go to the Dash documentation, let's look at the radio item, for example. I'll give you the link under the video. Go into the Dash docs and put DCC radio item right here. And if you go all the way to the end, radio item properties, you'll see that it has options as a component property. These are all properties. It has value, it has style. So in this case, we are going to use the value of the radio item right here. The value, the ship. But you can use anything. You can use inline, you can use the options, or maybe the style. It really depends what you want to grab from the screen, from the app. In this case, we want to grab the value, because the value is whatever the user selects: ship, house, or car. This represents the user selection, the value. So now let's go into the callback function. The callback function is built of callback function arguments, the body of the function, and then the returned objects of the function. So the function arguments comes from the component property of the input, or is tied to the component property of the input. So in this case, user selected, and you can call this whatever you want. You can call this selection or anything you want. This refers to the value of my radio button. So this is ship. So this is the same thing as saying ship, like this, right? Like that. Because it's interactive. It's ship right now, but if the user chooses house, then this is the same thing as saying house. Or if the user chooses car, then this will become car, because this is tied to the component property of the input, which is this. So we have our argument. Now that we have our argument, we can do anything we want inside the callback function, the function body. In this case, I'm just printing what's selected and the type. Just good practice so you can see what actually is happening on the screen. So if a user is choosing ship, we'll see that this is prints ship, printing ship, and the type is a string, which is important to know when you're working with arguments. So this is a string. So now what I want to do is I'm going to return an object. And this object is a string, and the returned object is assigned to the component property of the output. So in this case, this is assigned to the children of text displayed, of this markdown. So this is assigned here, right? So this is the same thing as saying take all of this and just put it here, right? But it's interactive, so we can't put it in the layout. It comes from the return value of the callback function. And every time we change what is selected. If we selected ship, this would be ship here. If we selected house, then this would be house, and then this would be house right here, right? But this is interactive, so we don't have to type it in there. This is what happens in the back end. So this is very important that you remember. Make this distinction. Returned objects are assigned to the component property of the output right here. But arguments are assigned or come from the component property of the inputs. Those are two different things. In this case, we are taking the value as a component property of the radio item, but we can take many other things. We can take the style, the class name, and whatever. Output the same. The object is going to be a string that is going to return to the children of the markdown. But what if we don't want to return affect the string, the children, sorry. What if we want to impact a different property of the markdown, not children? Let's see what other properties the markdown has. Markdown properties. The markdown properties has children, ID, class name. Let's style it. Let's impact the style of the markdown. So for that, you can see that the style is a dictionary, right? So let's go into the second, let's close this, and let's go into the second file, slider.py. In this case, you see that I'm going to, whatever I return here, this dictionary is going to impact, is going to be assigned to the component property of the output. in this case, style. Style of text displayed, style of the markdown, which is this. So the style, you need to know how to write style, obviously how to write an object into style, and this is font size 10. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to use the slider to update the font size of this static title. So if in this app we change text, we always put a different text in there. In this app, the text is always going to be the same. This is the title of the app. So here the text is always going to be the same. This is the title of the app, 20 or 14, always the same title. This is the title of the app. And the ID always stays the same, but what changes is the style property. And here you can see the dictionary that is returned to the style. The font size is always going to be font size. This is the key. And the key value is going to be what user selected. So user selected in the function argument. Remember, the function argument comes from the component property of the input. So this comes from what is assigned to the value of my slider. So let's look for my slider. Let's look for value 12. So this is the same thing as 12, 12, 12, and 12. And then all of this is returned right here as 12, right? But because it's interactive, we just put user selected, which refers to what is assigned to the component property value of the slider. And if the user chooses 20, then this becomes 20, and this becomes 20, and this, and obviously this. So this is the powerful things about the callback, that you can change or impact any type of property that belongs to a certain component, to markdown or slider. Now let's combine them. We used one output and one input. Let's use multiple outputs and multiple inputs. To do that, open the radio-slider.py file, and here we'll have the radio item and we'll have the slider. We'll have both, and the markdown. And in this case, we're taking two callback function arguments, selected text and the selected font size. This again, you can call this whatever you want. I called it selected text because this selected text refers to the first component property of the first input, and this selected font refers to the component property of the second input. Remember, this is important. Some people get them mixed up. The order of the inputs is from top to bottom, which will be aligned with the order of the arguments from left to right. So the first value refers to this, and this refers to the second value. So what is this? This selected text is the value of my dropdown. Let's see, my radio button, value ship. So this is like saying ship, or whatever the user chooses. The user might choose something else. And from the options, it could be house, it could be car. And this selected font size refers to the value of my slider, so 12. But if the user chooses between 10 to 20, if the user chooses 11 or 12 or 13 or 14, this would be 14, right? And I'm taking both of them, I'm printing them out, and then also I'm printing the type. It's good practice to know what type of variables or arguments are in there. So in this case, this is a string. The ship is a string, this text, but the font size is an integer, because you can see here this value is an integer. Important to know that. And now I can combine. If I needed two arguments because I had two inputs, it's very similar with the returned object. I have two outputs, so I need two objects returned. You can have two inputs and one output, in which case only one output object is returned. But here we have two output objects. So the first one, remember, top, bottom, left, right. So the top one refers to the one most on the left. This string refers to is assigned to the children of the text, the children of this one right here. And I'm going to use the same component ID, but I'm going to use a different property, the style. So this second object is returned to the style, is assigned to the style property of the same markdown right here, like this, whatever they choose. And that's why when you first load, this is, oh, I should probably change this. This is probably 12, like this, because the first value initially when loaded is 12, so this should be 12. And then if the user changes to 18, this becomes bigger, this becomes 18, this becomes 18, and then also obviously this whole style dictionary is replacing this right here, like that. Okay, so that's how it works. Remember, if you have two inputs, you need two arguments. If you have two outputs, you need two returned objects that refer to the one on the left to the top one, and then on the bottom one is the one on the right, and so on as they move, as you add more objects. You don't have to add this. I added this just for example purposes. You can also leave this out like that. It's the same thing. And you can also take children out because it's going to be returned here in the callback function. But I just left it here so it's easier for you to see. Okay, now let's open the dropdown file. In the dropdown file, we are going to we're going to return an object that is a list. Why a list? Because it's going to be assigned to the options property of a radio button. So if the first one we assigned things to the children property of the markdown, second one we assigned it to the style of the markdown, the style property, and the third file we did both. Now we're going to assign it to the options property of the dropdown of the radio item. Now, what's important to know is that a radio item has these options, and the options is a type of list. You can put anything you want in here, but it's a list type. So it's important to keep that in mind, that anything you return is returned in the type of a list. And we're using the dropdown as an input. The value of the dropdown are states ID. So it's the value, Texas in this case, of our dropdown that we're going to take inside the callback function argument. And we're going to take that value, and based on that value, we are going to return the options of a dropdown. This is also frequently referred to as a chained callback. A chain callback is a callback where components rely on each other. They're like chained to each other. They're connected to each other, and usually the second component is based on the first component. So the first component is the dropdown, and whatever I choose in the dropdown will affect the layout and the options of the second component. This is often referred to as chain callback, and you can read more about it in the documentation. So you see, if I choose New York, now I get these 3 cities in New York because these are the new options. So how do I do that? How do we do that? We're taking the value of this input, which is our states, right, which is the dropdown. So Texas, in this case it's Texas, right here Texas, but it could be also New York or Florida if I choose Florida. Now this is Florida, like that, right? So we're taking that state, and we can see here that it is a string, and we're saying if the chosen state equals Texas, then return a list of options that have cities within Texas: Dallas, Arlington, and Austin. These are the list of options that are returned, that are assigned to the options property of my radio button right here. So if somebody chooses Florida, it's Polk City, Pinecrest, and Orlando, and this is going to be returned to the options of the radio item like this. Cool? And if I say if nothing, like else, if none of these are true, if the dropdown is emptied X, then you see nothing because I'm returning an empty list into the options. But always check, always go. You might not know there are many different component properties for each component. So just check. Like here we see that we have the dropdown, and we see component dropdown properties. It has value that we're using. This value we're using as the input, but it also has multi-true, multi-false. It has placeholder. It has options as well. So you can use any of this as a component property of the input or of the output. It really depends what you want to do with your component and how you want to make your app interactive. Let me give you one last example with the graph, because we haven't done this with the graph yet. So I went into graph. DCC graph is where you will put your figures, where you will put your Plotly Express histograms or pie charts or bar charts inside the figure property of the graph. This is how it is displayed on the page. So let's look at this. I'm gonna hash out the callback so you can't see it. So it's not operational, it's not working. And now, because there's no callback, we're only going to see this graph right here, because this graph doesn't have anything. This is empty. So click on it. You see we have one graph and just an empty graph underneath, right? This graph is a PX histogram with built-in tips data from Plotly Express. X is day, Y is tip, and this is our figure, right? But the second figure is an empty dictionary, so we don't see anything underneath. What we're going to do is we're going to use the callback to pull the click data of the graph, of this DCC graph. It has click data. We're going to pull the click data, so if you click on it, so if you click on a certain day of the graph, it will build for us a pie chart with that day. Sunday, Saturday, Thursday, and Friday, right? So this is using click data. And at first I didn't remember, like, what is that data called? So I want, what is that property called? So I went into the DCC graph like this, and I saw graph properties, and it has many different properties here, right? Many of which is just for styling and layout purposes, but one of them at the very beginning is click data. And I read it, and it said that it's a dictionary. It's a type dictionary. That's what you'll see here. Well, you'll see later that it looks like a dictionary right here. See, it's a dictionary when we print this out. And it's data from the latest click event. So it's just reading the data from the user that clicks on a certain part of the graph. Click, click, it's reading the data. So what we have to do to use the click data property of the graph, of the DCC graph, we'll have to use this property, component property of the bar graph. This is my ID, bar graph. And this is just for an example. You don't, I didn't write it, but you can write it out. Click data equals empty dictionary. Like, this is nothing at the beginning, because this is a dictionary type. Dictionary type. So I can read this click data right here, which at the beginning is nothing. Well, I'll go over that in a second. Let's say this click chosen data is Sunday. Let's do Sunday. Sunday. So now this becomes, doesn't become Sunday. I printed this out. It will give you the whole data, chosen data. This is a chosen data of the Sunday bar. And if you look at the chosen data, you'll see that it looks like this. Points, dictionary where the key value is a list, and then we have another dictionary. So this is a lot of information, but I don't need all this information. All I want is to extract the day. And I see that the day is assigned to the key X of this dictionary. So I just drilled inside the data. I said, go into this chosen data, go into the points key value right here into this list, and go into the first item of the list, which is this whole dictionary right there, from here all the way to here, I think, or maybe even more. Go into the first item, and then go into the X key to extract the key value Sunday. So extract the day equals, it's the same thing as saying Sunday, right? And you can even see, because we print this out, print extract the day, it's printing Sunday. So it's a bit tricky because there's a lot of information, but again, I just found the day where I know where the data exists, and then I just drilled into it to extract that data, Sunday. And now that I have Sunday, I filter the DF, the data frame. I created a copy of it. Always create a copy of your data frame in the callback function. I filtered it so the day column of my data frame will only have rows where the day equals extracted day, Sunday in this case, or Thursday. Let's choose Thursday. So it only have rows that equals Thursday. So you see, if I print the DFF, the new DFF that I created, I only have rows where the day equals Thursday. And then I just build a pie chart. And a pie chart, which I'm building here, is just a DFF with the name smoker. The value is total bill. So smoker yes, smoker no, total bill value. And then I'm just giving it a title. Total bill by smoker on. I know this is just a string, so this is the extracted day inside the title right here. Right here. So this is really what I'm doing. So if I change it to Saturday, this becomes 49% of the total tip was given by non-smokers, and 50% was given by smokers, right? But all I'm doing is extracting the day from the selected data, from the click data, extracting the day, and then filtering the data frame, and then creating a new pie chart with a new data frame. And I return this figure. This fig is returned to the component property of the outputs, right? In this case, it's one output, so it's returned to the figure of my graph, which is right here, like this. So this is saying fig. It's exactly the same thing as fig, because this is just what we built down here, fig. All right. So this is the summary I wanted to give you the callback. I hope you learned a lot. Again, read about it in the documentation. The documentation is really good. Go into the main page, go into tutorial, go into the basics. You can read all about the basics here, but you can also see the dash callback chapter and look into advanced callback, duplicate callback outputs, and callback gotchas is a very good chapter as well. I hope you learned a lot. If you did, make sure to like this video, subscribe so you get alerts of new videos that I make and publish on YouTube. Star my GitHub repo if you'd like to donate. This is a membership-based channel. It exists only because of people like you. So you can click on the Patreon link. I'll be happy to have you become part of the Charming Data community. Thank you, and always remember, we're better together, so help each other out. Have a great day. Bye, everyone.